The summer of 1945 had brought victory in Europe, yet peace was fragile and uncertain. Cities lay in ruins, millions were displaced, and the nations that had fought side by side against Hitler were now beginning to measure each other, calculating influence, territory, and power in the post-war order. The war was over, but a different kind of tension had begun, one that was silent, subtle, and far more complex than any battlefield maneuver. General George S. Patton, celebrated for his audacious campaigns across France and Germany, was a man whose reputation preceded him wherever he went. He had led armored divisions at speeds and with daring that astonished allies and terrified enemies, often achieving victories that seemed impossible. Yet his confidence, sharp tongue, and unorthodox methods had made him controversial. Among some American officers, he was admired almost as a legend. Among others, he was a liability, unpredictable and difficult to control. Now, in Bavaria, he faced a different kind of challenge, a formal Allied reception meant to celebrate victory, but in reality a delicate test of post-war diplomacy. The hall gleamed with polished floors and chandeliers, medals reflected in the soft light, and uniforms were immaculate. Officers from the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union mingled politely, but behind each smile was calculation, a silent measurement of strength, pride, and intent. Every handshake, every glance carried the potential to shape future alliances or rivalries. Patton had faced death countless times on the battlefield, yet here he confronted something equally perilous, the collision of military achievement and political perception. Diplomacy, he would soon realize, could be as dangerous as any battlefield. The Soviets were present in force. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, the man credited with turning the tide of war at Stalingrad and leading the capture of Berlin, carried with him not just medals, but the immense weight of the Red Army's reputation. His presence was imposing, a reminder that victory in Europe had been shared but hard won by multiple powers. Zhukov moved with careful purpose, aware that every gesture and word could be interpreted as either respect or dominance. For Patton, this was a delicate balancing act. Known for speaking his mind without hesitation, he was about to encounter a situation that demanded both courage and tact. The reception, meant to be a ceremony of shared achievement, had an undercurrent of competition, a tension that hinted at the emerging rivalry that would later become the Cold War. Conversations flitted between battle strategies, the toll of war on civilians, and speculation about Europe's future. Officers compared achievements and perspectives, but always with an eye toward influence. The post-war order was not yet written, and in these moments words mattered as much as armies. Patton, who had never been timid in confrontation, sensed the intensity in the room. He was not merely attending a social event, he was a symbol of American strength, audacity, and defiance. The slightest misstep could alter perceptions of him personally and the United States as a rising power in the fragile post-war balance. Meanwhile, Zhukov, equally aware of his own stature and the achievements of the Red Army, assessed the Americans with the precision of a commander who had spent decades analyzing enemies and allies alike. Their reputations and histories would collide in a way that no battlefield strategy could fully prepare them for. Patton understood that the world was watching, even if the audience was only a room full of officers. Every word could be repeated, reported, and remembered. In that charged atmosphere, boundaries between diplomacy, ego, and history blurred. The polished exterior masked the complex realities beneath: years of war, countless lives lost, and the subtle jockeying for position that would define the post-war era. Patton's reputation for fearless leadership, his audacity on the battlefield, and his unwillingness to be intimidated were about to be tested in ways that had nothing to do with tanks, bullets, or artillery.
In those quiet, tense minutes, the hall became a battlefield of words, courage, and pride, and Patton's reputation as a decisive, sometimes reckless leader would be measured not by the enemy he had faced, but by the peer he was about to confront. The consequences of that encounter would ripple far beyond the evening, shaping perceptions and decisions in ways few could yet imagine, proving that even in peace, history is often determined by those bold enough to stand their ground.
The moment Marshal Georgy Zhukov entered the room, the atmosphere shifted subtly but noticeably. The Soviet commander had been at the forefront of some of the most decisive battles of the war, his strategies at Stalingrad, Kursk, and Berlin earning him a reputation not only as a brilliant tactician, but also as a man who carried the weight of an entire army on his shoulders. Every step he took, every gesture, seemed calculated to project authority. For the Americans, and for Patton in particular, Zhukov represented both a respected ally and a formidable rival. Patton had faced German generals, countless skirmishes, and the chaos of the front lines, but assessing Zhukov required a different kind of awareness. Here was a man whose victories had come at unimaginable cost, yet whose influence now extended into the corridors of diplomacy. In the post-war setting of Bavaria, the formalities of the reception masked a much deeper contest. Officers mingled, discussing logistics, casualties, and reconstruction, but beneath the surface lay questions of power, pride, and perception. Each interaction was a subtle negotiation, a test of dominance that did not require weapons. Patton was no stranger to scrutiny. His own career had been defined by bold maneuvers, rapid advances, and victories achieved through decisiveness and unorthodox thinking. Yet Zhukov's presence was a reminder that battlefield brilliance could be interpreted in vastly different ways depending on the observer. The Soviet marshal, aware of Patton's reputation, regarded the Americans with a mixture of respect and caution. He had witnessed firsthand the impact of Allied strategy, the audacity of their armored thrusts, and the operational efficiency that had helped end the war. At the same time, he understood the importance of asserting Soviet prestige. Words, gestures, and even subtle expressions could carry the weight of nations. The room was tense without being overtly so. Officers from different armies studied one another, quietly assessing motivations, alliances, and future intentions. Patton, ever aware of his surroundings, observed Zhukov closely. He recognized the marshal's precision, the deliberate way he navigated conversations, and the subtle signals that conveyed dominance without overt aggression. This was diplomacy as a battlefield, and both men were seasoned warriors in their own right. As the evening progressed, conversations touched on shared victories, the human cost of war, and the looming questions about Germany's reconstruction. Yet beneath these topics lay a more personal contest. Patton's confidence, often seen as arrogance, clashed with Zhukov's measured authority. Each was a symbol of their respective nations' power and pride. For the Soviet Union, Zhukov embodied discipline, sacrifice, and strategic genius. For the United States, Patton represented courage, ingenuity, and the audacity to take risks others would avoid. The stage was set for an inevitable collision, a moment where personal reputation, national pride, and the emerging post-war world would intersect. Few officers recognized the magnitude of what was about to unfold. To some, it was merely an exchange of words between two generals. To those who understood, it was a pivotal moment that reflected the delicate balance of power and the tensions that would later define the Cold War. Patton, sensing the undercurrents of rivalry and subtle challenge, prepared himself not with weapons or strategy, but with the sharpness of mind and the courage to confront insult head-on. He had faced armies, harsh winters, and fierce opposition, yet he understood that personal honor and national pride were stakes as high as any battlefield objective. Zhukov's gaze, careful and deliberate, hinted at both respect and expectation.
He had seen leaders crumble under pressure, and he was testing Patton, measuring both his reaction and his resolve. The Americans around him and the officers from other allied nations observed quietly. The room became charged with anticipation. Each word exchanged, each glance carried significance. In that moment, history was being written not on the fields of battle, but in a room of diplomacy, where courage would be measured in speech, composure, and the ability to stand firm in the presence of an equal. Patton's awareness of the stakes, combined with his understanding of Zhukov's stature, created a tension that was almost palpable. It was a quiet, invisible battlefield, yet one that demanded the same courage, clarity, and decisiveness that had defined Patton's career. The confrontation, when it came, would not just reveal the character of one man, but the evolving dynamics between two nations poised to become rivals. It was a moment that combined history, pride, and the subtle power of human perception, and would be remembered as one of the most dramatic exchanges in post-war diplomacy. In that room, the lines between war and peace blurred, and two generals, both champions of their armies and symbols of national strength, prepared to test one another in a battle of words, courage, and resolve, setting the stage for a confrontation that would shock everyone present and echo far beyond Bavaria.
The tension in the room had reached a point where it was almost tangible. Conversations slowed, and glances lingered longer than usual. Patton, ever observant, had noticed Zhukov's deliberate scrutiny from the moment he entered. The Soviet marshal was not merely walking into a reception, he was assessing, calculating, testing the American general. Patton knew that in diplomacy, as on the battlefield, the smallest misstep could have consequences far beyond the immediate moment. And then it happened. Zhukov, with careful precision, directed an insult toward Patton, questioning his courage and the value of American victories. The words were sharp, intentional, and calculated to provoke. To call a general a coward in the presence of peers was more than disrespect. It was a direct challenge to honor, reputation, and authority. The room froze. Officers from three nations instinctively stopped their conversations. The air, thick with metals, polished uniforms, and the subtle scent of tobacco, seemed to tighten around the two men. Patton, known for his fearlessness in the face of enemy fire, had now encountered a test of a different kind. Every muscle in his body understood the stakes. This was a battle of perception, of pride, and of national prestige. Silence stretched for a heartbeat, and then, in the way only a seasoned warrior could, Patton responded. His words were deliberate, measured, yet carried the full force of his experience. He reminded everyone present, not just Zhukov, of the victories of the American army, the sacrifices of his men, and the relentless campaigns that had driven the Nazis back from Normandy to Bavaria. Every sentence reinforced the reality of battlefield experience, juxtaposed against what Patton perceived as an attempt to diminish it. Observers later described the moment as electrifying. There was an intensity in the air that seemed almost physical. Even the polished chandeliers and crystal glasses felt like part of the charged environment. Officers leaned forward, sensing the historical weight of the exchange. Patton's response was not merely defensive, it was a declaration. He was asserting the reality of what had been accomplished, refusing to allow perception or ego to undermine it. Zhukov, who had faced countless opponents, had never encountered a reply so direct and unflinching. The exchange illuminated the contrast between battlefield courage and diplomatic subtlety. For Patton, courage had always been measured in action, in decisiveness, in willingness to face death head-on. But here, in this gilded room, courage was being tested in the form of words, composure, and the ability to command respect without aggression. It was a confrontation unlike any other. In those tense minutes, the room had become a theater, each officer a witness to history unfolding. The conversation was more than personal, it was symbolic. Patton embodied American audacity, innovation, and tactical brilliance.
Zhukov represented Soviet discipline, strategic genius, and the weight of an army that had endured unimaginable losses. The clash was as much about national pride as it was about individual reputation. Witnesses later recounted how every movement, every glance, and every carefully chosen word contributed to the drama. Patton's calm, confident stance contrasted with the deliberate, calculating presence of Zhukov, and the combination created a tension that seemed almost unbearable. It was not a fight that would leave bruises or casualties, yet it was a battle nonetheless, one that demanded courage, clarity, and a willingness to stand firm under scrutiny. The significance of the moment was not lost on anyone present. Diplomats, officers, and aides understood that this exchange could ripple far beyond the hall, shaping perceptions in Washington, London, and Moscow. The balance of post-war influence, fragile as it was, hung in the air alongside the polite smiles and formal courtesies of the reception. Patton's words did more than defend his personal honor. They served as a declaration of American achievement, a reminder that battlefield victories could not be dismissed or minimized by anyone, no matter how celebrated. The room remained still, the usual hum of conversation replaced by the resonance of history in motion. Every officer present sensed the weight of what had just transpired. This was more than a confrontation. It was a statement about courage, reputation, and the subtle but critical battles of influence that defined the post-war world. When the exchange finally ended, the silence lingered for a moment longer, as though the room itself were catching its breath. Officers exchanged cautious glances, recognizing that they had witnessed a defining moment, one that would be recounted, analyzed, and remembered for years to come. Patton had faced armies, harsh winters, and relentless campaigns, yet here he had faced a different test, one that required the same fearlessness and decisiveness as any battlefield maneuver. Zhukov, for all his strategic genius and battlefield experience, had met an opponent who could match him not with force, but with the clarity of purpose, the weight of truth, and the audacity to speak boldly in defense of honor. In that room, a moment of history had been created, illustrating that courage is not only measured in combat, but also in the unwavering defense of principles, the steadfast assertion of achievement, and the willingness to confront challenge head-on, regardless of the consequences. The confrontation between Patton and Zhukov would echo far beyond Bavaria, shaping both men's legacies and foreshadowing the complex interplay of power, pride, and rivalry that would define the coming Cold War.
The moments following the confrontation were charged with an invisible electricity. Patton had spoken, and his words had left no doubt. American victories, the courage of his men, and the reality of battlefield achievement were not to be questioned. Yet the immediate reaction was not uniformly positive. Within the American delegation, admiration mixed with unease. Some officers whispered praise for his boldness, recognizing that Patton had defended not only his honor, but the reputation of the United States Army itself. Others, particularly those more attuned to diplomacy than combat, feared the potential repercussions. In the delicate post-war environment, even a single statement could ripple far beyond the room, reaching Washington, London, and ultimately Moscow. Patton's response was already being recorded, noted, and evaluated by aides and officers. Reports would later describe the incident in careful, coded language, balancing admiration with concern. His fearless, uncompromising nature, so valuable in battle, had created unease among political overseers who feared the impact on international relations. The Soviet delegation, led by Zhukov, processed the moment differently. For Zhukov, the exchange had been a test, a measure of both character and resolve. Patton had met the challenge with confidence and precision. The Soviets understood that the American general was both brilliant and unflinching, capable of defending himself and his nation's achievements with authority. Yet they also recognized the potential for tension this confrontation could sow. Over the following days, the incident began to ripple through both military and political channels.
In Washington, intelligence reports carefully documented the exchange. Officers and analysts debated its significance, weighing the implications for Allied unity and the emerging post-war order. Some argued that Patton's boldness underscored the strength of American leadership. Others warned that his refusal to temper his words could strain relations with the Soviet Union at a critical moment when cooperation was still necessary. Within the U.S. Army, the incident intensified existing scrutiny of Patton's career. He had long been a controversial figure, admired for his brilliance, but often seen as unpredictable. His outspokenness, combined with incidents like this, made higher command uneasy. For some, the confrontation illustrated the very qualities that had made him a legendary commander. For others, it was evidence that his temperament could create diplomatic friction. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, reports of the exchange reinforced Zhukov's understanding of the Americans' character and determination. Analysts noted that the American leadership valued directness and initiative, qualities that could serve as both assets and obstacles in future interactions. Within Europe, whispers of the confrontation began to circulate among Allied officers. While many details were classified, the essence of the encounter, the clash of two commanding personalities and the defense of honor, was understood by those who had witnessed it. Diplomats and military leaders recognized that this incident was more than a personal dispute. It symbolized the emerging tensions between two nations that had fought together against a common enemy, but now faced competing interests in the post-war world. Historians later noted that these early confrontations foreshadowed the Cold War, illustrating how pride, perception, and national interest could collide even among allies. Patton himself was acutely aware of the consequences. He understood that courage on the battlefield did not guarantee favor in political circles. His reputation for decisiveness and audacity was admired, but it also drew scrutiny and criticism. The incident in Bavaria would become part of a larger narrative about the limits of personal boldness in the intricate world of international diplomacy. Even as he continued to serve in the post-war period, Patton's words and actions were monitored carefully. Some officers questioned whether he could be allowed the autonomy he had exercised during wartime. Others, however, admired his integrity and refusal to compromise on principles of honor and leadership. The contrast between battlefield success and political prudence became starkly clear. In the weeks following the reception, Patton's confrontation with Zhukov was cited in private discussions as both an example of courage and a cautionary tale. It highlighted the tension between personal reputation, national pride, and the delicate dance of post-war diplomacy. Every report, every anecdote, every recollection reinforced the complexity of the situation. The incident did more than defend Patton's honor. It exposed the underlying fragility of Allied relations, revealing that unity in war did not necessarily translate to harmony in peace. Even years later, historians and analysts return to this moment as a key illustration of the interplay between personal character and international politics. Patton's willingness to confront a figure as formidable as Zhukov demonstrated both his bravery and his limitations. It revealed the challenges of transitioning from the clarity of battlefield objectives to the ambiguity of political and diplomatic strategy. For the men who had witnessed the exchange, and for those who would later study it, the event underscored a simple truth. The stakes of diplomacy could be as high and the consequences as profound as any battle. The fallout from that single confrontation extended far beyond Bavaria. It shaped perceptions of American leadership, influenced the management of post-war occupation zones, and foreshadowed the delicate tensions that would define the early years of the Cold War. Patton's words were bold, uncompromising, and historically significant, but they also carried risk. They reminded all present that even in victory, the interplay of power, pride, and perception could have consequences as potent as any military maneuver. The confrontation between Patton and Zhukov had become more than a personal clash. It was a defining moment that illuminated the complex, often fragile nature of post-war diplomacy, the weight of personal reputation, and the subtle yet powerful influence of courage and audacity in shaping history.
The confrontation in Bavaria had ended, but its impact reverberated far beyond the reception hall. For Patton, the events of that evening became part of a larger narrative about his life, his career, and the challenges of leadership in both war and peace. He had faced the fury of battle countless times, yet this encounter was different. There were no tanks, no bullets, no explosions, only words, reputation, and the weight of human perception. It was a test of courage of a subtler sort, one that demanded precision, composure, and the audacity to assert truth in the face of a challenge. Historians later noted that Patton's response to Zhukov was emblematic of his character, fearless, direct, and unyielding. He did not shrink from the challenge, nor did he allow diplomatic sensitivity to override his sense of honor. This moment highlighted the duality of his legacy. On the one hand, it showcased his brilliance as a military leader, capable of commanding respect through courage and conviction. On the other, it revealed the dangers of translating battlefield audacity into the delicate realm of international diplomacy. In the years that followed, Patton's reputation continued to be a subject of debate. Military analysts praised his strategic vision, his decisiveness, and his ability to inspire troops under the most extreme conditions. Yet politicians and diplomats often expressed concern about his outspoken nature and the potential consequences of unchecked assertiveness. The confrontation with Zhukov became a case study in the limits of personal boldness when measured against the complex realities of global power. For the Soviets, the exchange reinforced their understanding of the American approach to leadership. Patton's unwavering defense of his men, his achievements, and his country's role in the war underscored the confidence and pride that characterized the United States military at the time. It also revealed the potential challenges of post-war collaboration. The interaction between Patton and Zhukov foreshadowed the delicate negotiations, subtle tensions, and strategic calculations that would dominate the early years of the Cold War. Scholars have since examined the incident as more than a personal clash. It was a symbolic confrontation reflecting the broader dynamics between two emerging superpowers. The conversation in that Bavarian hall illustrated how personal courage, national pride, and historical memory could intersect to shape both individual legacies and international relations. Patton's insistence on speaking boldly, defending honor, and asserting truth became a defining feature of his post-war narrative. Even as his career faced constraints and scrutiny, his actions left an indelible impression on those who witnessed them. Officers who were present described the event as electrifying, a rare moment where the tension between personalities mirrored the tension between nations. The episode demonstrated that leadership is measured not only by victories on the battlefield, but also by the courage to confront challenge, assert achievement, and uphold principles in moments of uncertainty. In reflecting on Patton's legacy, historians note that this confrontation exemplifies the delicate balance between personal character and political reality. Patton's audacity inspired respect, but it also reminded the world that heroism alone could not dictate the outcomes of diplomacy or international relations. His ability to navigate this balance, even imperfectly, contributed to the mythos of Patton as a complex, larger-than-life figure whose actions extended beyond tactics and strategy into the realm of symbolic influence. For Zhukov, the exchange offered lessons as well. The encounter revealed the Americans' readiness to assert themselves and the importance of recognizing the nuances of honor, pride, and perception in diplomatic interactions. Both men, representing their nation's achievements and ambitions, demonstrated that personal courage and conviction could leave a lasting impact far beyond the immediate moment. In the broader historical context, the confrontation served as an early glimpse of the challenges that would define the post-war world.
Allied cooperation, while victorious in the war, was now giving way to a landscape shaped by rivalry, suspicion, and competing interests. The words exchanged between Patton and Zhukov in Bavaria were a precursor to the tensions that would eventually become the Cold War, illustrating how moments of personal courage could have geopolitical significance. Ultimately, the legacy of this confrontation is twofold. On one level, it is a testament to Patton's character, his fearlessness, decisiveness, and commitment to honor. On another, it is a reminder that history is often shaped by the interplay of personality, pride, and perception. The episode captures the delicate dance between individual audacity and the broader currents of power, diplomacy, and international relations. For those who study military history, leadership, or diplomacy, the encounter provides enduring lessons about courage, influence, and the complexities of post-war power. Patton's response to Zhukov was more than a personal victory. It was a statement about the importance of standing firm, defending achievement, and confronting challenge with clarity and conviction. It reminds us that even after the guns fall silent, battles remain, battles of honor, reputation, and perception that can shape history in ways as profound as any battlefield triumph. In the end, the confrontation stands as a defining moment in the life of General George S. Patton, a reflection of his enduring legacy and a symbol of the subtle but powerful forces that continue to influence the course of nations long after the war has ended.